You wouldn't believe the kind of chaos that started all because of few barks. It all began on a regular Monday morning. I had just returned home after a long night shift at the K9 training facility where I worked. My dogs, Duke, Max, and Shadow, were settled in their kennels after a solid training session, relaxing and quiet. I made myself some coffee, ready to crash on the couch, when I noticed a bright pink slip stuck to my door. Another HOA complaint. This time it read, "Ongoing noise disturbance from dogs. Final warning before fines." My heart sank. This was the third notice in 2 weeks, and none of them made sense. My dogs were loud during training hours, sure, but that was done off-site. At home, they were well-disciplined and calm. Someone had to be exaggerating or had it out for me. I lived in a small, tidy neighborhood managed by an overly zealous HOA, led by a woman named Beverly Clark. She was the type of person who walked around with a clipboard and binoculars, acting like she was running the Pentagon instead of a suburban community. She'd already fined me last year for having non-regulation trash cans, and once for leaving a dog toy in the front yard. But this dog complaint was different. It felt personal. I decided to review my security footage, just in case. Sure enough, around 10:30 p.m. the night before, there was some barking, but not from my dogs. It came from down the street. Yet somehow, the complaint still ended up on my door. The next day, I saw Beverly standing outside, talking to 2 other HOA board members. They were pointing toward my house and nodding. As I approached, they suddenly smiled and waved like everything was fine. I asked them directly if they had actually confirmed the noise was coming from my home, and Beverly simply replied, "We've received multiple complaints from neighbors. You're responsible for controlling your animals." I tried explaining my job as a K9 trainer, that my dogs were professionally trained and rarely barked without cause, but she didn't seem to care. "The rules apply to everyone," she said, walking away. A few days later, another letter arrived, this one more threatening. It stated that the HOA was considering escalating the issue to local animal control if I didn't resolve the noise disturbance. I was furious. Not only was this unfair, it was becoming a risk to my professional reputation. If word got out that a K9 officer was being investigated for nuisance dogs, it could cause problems for my job. I called animal control myself and requested an inspection to prove everything was in order. The officer who came by, Officer Daniels, had actually worked with me during a K9 workshop last year. He laughed when he saw the condition of the kennels and the calm behavior of the dogs. "If all dogs were like yours, I'd be out of a job," he said. But despite his clean report, Beverly didn't back down. The HOA scheduled a hearing about my repeated violations, and I was asked to attend or face daily fines. That's when things started getting out of hand. The evening before the hearing, I caught Beverly walking around my backyard, inside my property line, taking pictures with her phone. I confronted her, and she claimed she was documenting code violations. I asked her to leave immediately and warned her that entering private property without permission could lead to legal action. She huffed and walked off, but I could tell she was rattled. I added more cameras around my yard after that. Then came the HOA hearing. I walked in with a stack of paperwork, vet records, sound readings, the clean report from animal control, and training certifications for all 3 dogs. But as soon as the meeting started, I realized it wasn't going to be fair. Beverly controlled the agenda, talked over me, and ignored the documents I presented. "We've had enough of the barking," she said. "It's disrupting the peace of our community." I asked her to play the audio evidence I had submitted, but she refused. One of the board members looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. That's when I made a decision. If they weren't going to play fair, I let my credentials speak louder than my words. I emailed a few of my colleagues from the state police K9 division, explaining the situation. One of them, Sergeant Lopez, suggested bringing a few of the dogs to the next HOA event, a community safety fair happening in 2 weeks. It was meant to educate residents about crime prevention. I emailed Beverly and offered to give a K9 safety demo at the fair. She replied with a snarky, "Only if your dogs can behave." Oh, they would. Better than she ever expected. The day of the community safety fair arrived with a buzz of excitement in the air. Folding tables lined the neighborhood park, booths with pamphlets and baked goods were being set up, and kids ran around waving balloons. Beverly strutted around in her oversized sun hat, clipboard in hand, giving orders like she was running a military drill. I arrived with my police SUV, pulling a trailer that held my 3 K9s. Dressed in my official uniform, I could already feel the eyes on me as I unloaded the dogs one by one. Duke, Max, and Shadow stepped out calmly, alert but composed, each wearing their training harness with a K9 unit logo. A few curious neighbors gathered nearby, and I greeted them with a polite nod before getting the dogs in place for the demonstration. Beverly approached with her usual tight smile, clearly expecting something to go wrong. She gave me a once-over, then looked at the dogs. "Let's hope they don't scare the children," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. I simply nodded and continued setting up the perimeter for the demonstration. The time came, and a small crowd had formed. I picked up the mic and introduced myself, explaining what K9 units do, how we train dogs for search, rescue, and suspect apprehension, and how the same dogs people fear can save lives in dangerous situations. Then I gave a live demo. Duke sniffed out a hidden dummy with precision. Max followed complex hand commands perfectly, and Shadow demonstrated how to stay completely still despite loud noises and distractions. The crowd was amazed. Kids clapped, parents asked questions, and even the most skeptical neighbors looked impressed. When it was over, I invited people to come pet the dogs, one at a time, under supervision, and take photos. The atmosphere was warm and full of energy. Beverly, however, stood frozen with a forced smile as her carefully crafted image of me as the reckless dog owner crumbled in real time. One of the city's police lieutenants, who had come to support the event, shook my hand and publicly thanked me for my service. He even mentioned that all 3 dogs were certified top-level working dogs under state standards. A few neighbors turned to Beverly, visibly confused about how someone so professional and disciplined had been accused of being a public nuisance. The tension around her was thick. Later that evening, I returned home to find another note taped to my door. But this time, it wasn't a complaint. It was an anonymous thank you card. Inside was a message from a neighbor I didn't even know that well, saying how her son had developed a fear of dogs after an incident at a park, but after meeting Duke, he wanted to learn more about training. That one note meant more than anything the HOA had thrown at me in weeks. I pinned it to my fridge. I thought that might be the end of it, that Beverly would finally back off. But of course, people like her don't give up that easily. A week later, I received an official notice from the HOA stating they had scheduled another inspection of my property to investigate safety concerns related to large dog breeds. They claimed they were concerned for the well-being of the community. It was laughable. I had years of clean records, certifications, and now community goodwill on my side. Still, I knew I had to stay 2 steps ahead. I contacted my lawyer, who had helped me with K9 legal compliance in the past, and asked him to attend the inspection as a witness. When inspection day came, Beverly showed up with 2 HOA board members and a man she introduced as an independent compliance inspector. My lawyer and I stood at the gate, waiting. The moment they stepped onto my driveway, the inspector's demeanor changed. He recognized the dogs immediately. Turns out, he was a retired K9 handler himself. As he checked the kennels, the fence, and the yard, he nodded in approval. Everything met or exceeded legal standards. He even complimented me on the training quality and safety measures. Beverly's face fell slightly with each word of praise. The final straw came when I presented a binder of letters from neighbors who had attended the safety fair and supported the dog's presence in the community. Over a dozen statements, all signed, describing how safe they felt, how impressed they were, and how unfair they believed the complaints had been. My lawyer handed the binder to the board members, who quietly took it without comment. The inspection ended with no violations. As the group turned to leave, Beverly's frustration was clear. She didn't say a word. Her silence said it all. But that wasn't the end. A few days later, something unexpected happened. An anonymous tip had been sent to a local journalist who ran a popular suburban news blog. The article was titled, "When the HOA Crosses the Line, A Trainer's Fight Against Bias." It didn't name names directly, but anyone from our community could tell it was about Beverly and the ongoing harassment. The story gained traction fast, and soon people from other neighborhoods began sharing their own experiences with this fight against bias. It didn't name names directly, but anyone from our community could tell it was about Beverly and the ongoing harassment. The story gained traction fast, and soon people from other neighborhoods began sharing their own experiences with unfair HOA practices. The comment section was flooded with support and calls for reform. That's when the tide truly began to shift. The days that followed felt like a storm slowly rolling through our once quiet neighborhood. The article had sparked more than just gossip. It had lit a fire under people who had stayed silent for too long. Neighbors who had once smiled politely and kept their heads down were now stopping to chat with me, sharing their own run-ins with the HOA and Beverly's overreach. One elderly couple, the Taylors, admitted they were fined for planting wildflowers in their front yard because it wasn't part of the approved floral list. A single mother down the street confessed she'd been warned for leaving her kids' bikes on the porch. People were tired, and for the first time, they felt they weren't alone. What started as a false complaint about barking dogs had uncovered something much deeper, a pattern of control, intimidation, and hypocrisy. A small group of neighbors decided to organize a meeting, not an official HOA one, but a community town hall of sorts. They asked me to come speak about my experience. I agreed, though I wasn't sure what to expect. That night, the local community center was packed. People sat on folding chairs, leaning against walls, even standing in the back. I shared the timeline of events, from the first false complaint to the unfair inspection attempts. I didn't dramatize it. I just told the truth. When I mentioned Beverly walking into my backyard without permission, the room buzzed with murmurs. Then others spoke. Mr. Nguyen revealed he had been fined multiple times for his fence color, even though it matched the original builder's palette. The Parks family shared that Beverly had rejected their application for a wheelchair ramp for their aging father, citing aesthetic disruption. The frustration in the room was thick. It was no longer about me or my dogs. It was about how one person had weaponized power under the guise of rules. Momentum started building quickly. A petition was passed around calling for an emergency vote to reevaluate the HOA board. Within 2 days, they had enough signatures to call a special meeting. Beverly, of course, tried to block it, claiming the petition was invalid. But several neighbors dug up the HOA bylaws and proved her wrong. The meeting was scheduled, and flyers were posted on every mailbox. Social media groups that were once used for garage sales and lost cats were now filled with discussions about leadership change and transparency. Beverly had ruled the neighborhood with fear and silence for years, but now that silence had been broken. Around this time, another twist unfolded. Someone submitted a public records request and discovered that Beverly had been using HOA funds to pay for consulting services with a company registered under her cousin's name. The services were vague: lawn evaluations, community outreach, landscaping opinions, but the invoices added up to thousands of dollars. When this news broke, it was like pouring gasoline on fire. The community demanded an audit. Beverly tried to push back, saying it was all above board, but the pressure was mounting. Even her own allies on the board began to distance themselves. 2 members resigned just days before the vote, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. They didn't want to go down with her. The emergency meeting arrived, and once again the room was full. Beverly attempted to hold her ground, opening with a speech about order, tradition, and respect. But it fell flat. People weren't interested in excuses anymore. One by one, residents stood up and listed their grievances. Unfairness, selective rule enforcement, unauthorized expenses, her refusal to consider accessibility requests. By the time it was my turn to speak, the air was already thick with determination. I thanked everyone for their support, reminded them that good rules protect people, not punish them, and that the goal wasn't revenge but fairness. The vote was cast, and within minutes, the results were announced. Beverly had been voted out as HOA president by a landslide. The mood afterward was electric. People were hugging, clapping, and talking about what came next. A temporary committee was formed to manage the transition, and for the first time in years, the community felt like a community. But the story wasn't quite over. Just when we thought things were settling down, a news crew arrived in the neighborhood. The journalist who wrote the original blog post had shared our story with a local TV station, and they wanted to do a segment. I agreed, hoping the spotlight might inspire other neighborhoods facing similar issues. The interview aired the following weekend, and soon messages started flooding my inbox from people across the country. Dog trainers, veterans with service animals, homeowners fighting their own HOA battles. What had started as a few bark complaints had become something much bigger. The morning after the news segment aired, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Emails, social media messages, even calls from unfamiliar numbers poured in. Most were from strangers thanking me for standing up, sharing their own stories of HOA mistreatment, and asking how they could take action in their neighborhoods. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. My quiet life as a K9 trainer had somehow turned into a symbol of resistance against unnecessary control. Even my workplace took notice. My commander at the K9 training unit called to personally commend me for how I handled the situation and mentioned that the department was considering using my case in future training modules about community relations and public image. It was surreal, but I welcomed the chance to use what had been a painful experience for something good. Back in the neighborhood, change was finally underway. The temporary committee held open meetings at the community center every week. Neighbors actually showed up, eager to share ideas, suggest improvements, and rebuild the sense of unity that had been missing for so long. One of the first changes was the introduction of a fair, transparent complaint system. No more anonymous warnings or baseless fines. Every concern had to be submitted with proof, reviewed by multiple board members, and resolved through communication before any action was taken. They also created a resident support program, offering help with yard work, repairs, and pet care for elderly or disabled homeowners. It wasn't about punishing people anymore. It was about helping them. To everyone's surprise, Beverly didn't leave the neighborhood. She stayed in her house, though she kept to herself. The tall hedges around her yard got even taller, and she was rarely seen outside. The once daily patrols with her clipboard were a thing of the past. Her silence was a small but powerful symbol of the shift that had occurred. Occasionally, I'd see her through my window, peeking out as neighbors gathered for community BBQs, dog walks, or garden clubs. Maybe she regretted how things played out, or maybe she was just waiting for a chance to reclaim power. But the neighborhood had changed, and there was no going back. As for my dogs, they became local celebrities. People would stop during walks just to greet them. Shadow even got his own little fan club among the neighborhood kids. Someone painted a mural on the side of the community center featuring police dogs, service animals, and even a cartoon version of Beverly's infamous clipboard being replaced with a welcome sign. It made everyone laugh, even the former board members who had quietly returned as regular residents. The story of our neighborhood spread further than I ever imagined. A national dog magazine reached out to feature Duke, Max, and Shadow in a special edition about working dogs and community outreach. I didn't think much of it until copies started showing up in mailboxes with our faces on the cover. Then came the biggest surprise. A representative from the state government contacted me, saying they had been following the story. They were exploring new legislation aimed at increasing oversight of homeowner associations and protecting residents' rights, especially those with service animals or medical needs. They asked me to contribute to the drafting process as an advisor. I agreed immediately. I knew I couldn't fix every HOA across the country, but if I could help even one more person avoid the stress I had faced, it would be worth it. I flew out twice that year to attend meetings, bringing everything I had learned from our community's journey. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in oranges and pinks, I sat on my porch watching the neighborhood kids play tag while parents chatted on lawns. Max lay beside me, ears perked, eyes calm. Duke and Shadow were chewing on toys nearby. The atmosphere was peaceful, so different from the tension that had once hung over the streets like a fog. A few houses away, a new family was moving in. Their kids waved excitedly as a small Labrador puppy bounded out of their car. I stood up, walked over, and helped them carry in a box. They thanked me, not knowing anything about what had happened the year before. And that's when it hit me. The biggest wins don't always come with headlines or viral videos. They come quietly, In everyday moments, the absence of fear, the presence of kindness, and the freedom to live without someone weaponizing rules against you. What started as a petty complaint about barking dogs became a journey of resilience, justice, and transformation. And while my dogs have been trained to protect and serve in high-stakes situations, in the end, they helped bring peace to the very place we called home. That was a mission accomplished we could all be proud of.